What is up, guys? I am Sa Ra Garvey. You better like, you better share, you better comment, and you better subscribe, because today we're going deep. We are back with a special guest. Temporarily back, big bro. Yeah, temporarily back. But a lot of you have been asking for him. So what we're going to do is we're going to go a little bit deep today. So grab your popcorn, grab your water, grab your drink, grab a smoke, grab whatever it is that you need to grab, because we are going to be getting very deep today, big bro, right? There's been a lot of talk going on in the news with China, Russia, Ukraine, the US, the UK. They're talking about war. A lot of the time.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that it is just talk.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that it's hyperbole. They don't think it's real. So as somebody who is very knowledgeable on these types of things, how far are we away from war?
That's a serious question, and before I go any further, I'd say this. I think that these types of videos are very essential for us to put out news and information, not news and information that you would readily find in the media, because the media itself has been corrupted. Even the social media that we have has been corrupted. And essentially what happens is that social media, generally speaking, is meant to send you to sleep, which is the reason why many content creators create foolishness, and essentially they're creating it for foolish people. And
but that's the internet in general.
Well, that might be the case, but we want to do something different and look at something different, what's occurring at the moment, and it's very important. Now, you asked me, is war coming? Before I answer that question, I want to read a quote by a chap called Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has just declared his candidacy for the Democrat Party in America. Now, for those of you who are up to date with history, he is the son of the murdered U.S. Attorney, Robert F. Kennedy Sr. He was murdered in the 60s, I think it was 67, allegedly by Sirhan. He is also the nephew of President Kennedy, JFK, who was murdered in Dallas, Texas in 1963. And so he comes from a lineage whereby there has been a great deal of pain. And this is what he said just recently regarding what was going on in Ukraine, and certainly in relation to how Russia is being portrayed on the world scene. Before any further, I'm not an apologist for Putin, Zelensky, none of them. I'm merely here giving a point of view. It might not be yours, but I'd ask you just to listen in. This is what Robert F. Kennedy said. He said, in 1991-92, the United States of America repeatedly made promises to the Americans that if they withdrew 100,000 troops from Germany and allowed the country to reunite within NATO, then we, America, will not move NATO an inch east. Many of you know NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, essentially America. Since then, he went on, we've moved the bloc 1,000 miles east and opened up 14 new countries. The Russians warned the then ambassador and now CIA chief, Bill Burns, that if NATO entered Ukraine, it would be a red line and should not be crossed. Let's put ourselves in the place of the Russians. My uncle, that's President JF Kennedy, who was murdered, always said, put yourself in your opponent's shoe. Now look, I know what he meant by that, really do. Because you see, the situation that's occurring at the moment in Ukraine is a situation where whichever American president of the last 200 years would have taken exactly the same position that Putin has taken with Ukraine. Let me go further. The Americans wouldn't have tolerated it because the Americans have what's called a sphere of influence. And to that end, they coined the term the Monroe Doctrine. Now, on camera you'll see a picture of President James Monroe. I think he was president between 1817 and 1825. And they put into effect what was called the Monroe Doctrine. For the historians amongst you, they didn't actually coin that term until 1850, but there was a Monroe Doctrine. Now, question we want to ask is what is
I was going to ask, what is the Monroe Doctrine?
What is the Monroe Doctrine? Right, the Monroe Doctrine, they state it is a United States foreign policy position that opposes, at the time, European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. It holds that any intervention in the political affairs of the Americas by foreign powers is a potentially hostile act against the United States. That doctrine is in force today. America has a sphere of influence in the Americas, which includes the Caribbean, Northern America, Canada, and Southern America. Yeah, this is what they call their sphere of influence.
So when you say they have a sphere of influence, where does that influence and what does it look like?
Okay, that's
how does it extend? What does that mean?
Well, it's a good question. If we go back now, to a brief history lesson, if we go back, for example, to October the 22nd, 1962, the then communist Soviet Union, remember the Soviet Union actually broke up in 1991. But
you mean the USSR?
Or the USSR, yeah,
right,
yeah,
okay.
Definitely. USSR, I use the terms interchangeably.
Right.
Now, the Soviet Union, we say the forerunner of today's Russia, moved missiles from so-called communist Russia to Cuba, because, as you're well aware, there was a
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, yes, but let me tell you how it came about. There was a revolution in Cuba, led by the man you see on the screen, Fidel
Castro.
Fidel Castro, that's right. And Fidel Castro clearly is a leftist, and he had communist leanings, and he immediately turned to Russia, great distance away, but he had a similar ideology. As a result of that, he came to power in 1959. A couple of years later, I think it was 62, Russians moved missiles into Cuba. Now, Cuba lies 90 miles off the coast of Florida, essentially meaning that those missiles in Cuba could have, there's the ability to have what's called a first strike advantage,
right? Because
those missiles were there, and so
that's only 90 miles away.
Well, it's only 90 miles away, but those missiles at the time would clearly have the capability not just of destroying the southern coast of America, but also it had the capability to target Washington, D.C. itself. At the time when this was found out, Americans sent spy planes over and saw these missiles and went crazy. And we had 13 days. It was actually a film called 13 Days. I'd recommend you watch it. Very, very good film. We had a situation whereby the world was on the precipice of World War III. And this is not hyperbole. It was on the verge of World War III. Now, at the particular time, the then Soviet Union leader, Nikita Khrushchev, was very clear that he was not going to back down. President Kennedy made clear, and the war hawks who were amongst him made clear that if they didn't back down, we really were looking at a third world war. A deal was struck, a public deal and a secret deal, if you like. The public deal was that Cuba, the Russians would remove their missiles from Cuba. There was an undertaking that was given by the Americans, for what that's worth. Generally speaking, it's not worth very much. But an undertaking was given that they wouldn't attack Cuba, and the secret deal was that the Americans would remove missiles from Turkey because of the proximity to Turkey and Russia. It's the Soviet Union.
USSR.
That's exactly right. And the reason why I mention that story about the Monroe Doctrine and America, in my opinion,
with their sphere of influence.
That's right. America quite rightly taken the position that under no circumstances can we have a country as powerful as the Soviet Union, especially in terms of their atomic nuclear arsenal. We cannot have them anywhere near America. We will understand that. We will agree with that. You accept
that makes sense.
That's right. And so the reason I pointed out that Monroe Doctrine is that it's very clear that whilst America quite rightly has a Monroe Doctrine as a superpower, and it has a sphere of influence, and it doesn't want anybody near them who is going to cause that problem. The same cannot be asked for by the Soviet Union or Russia today. And so we have a situation that has occurred whereby NATO is now at war with Vladimir Putin and Russia. Now, you heard right. NATO is at war with Russia.
But what we've been told is that Ukraine is at war with Russia, not NATO.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm telling you that Ukraine is merely a fig leaf for the military ambitions of NATO, and for NATO, you read America. This is what's happening at the moment, and so I would ask you to be very, very careful and look very, very deeply before we start making statements that are provably untrue.
What you're basically saying is that America's at war with Russia, because if NATO is America, and NATO are the ones at loggerheads with Russia, you're basically saying that the US and Russia are actually having what they call it a proxy war, or
well, that's exactly what's gone on, and you're quite right. It's exactly what you've just stated. It's a proxy war. America has fought these proxy wars during its entire existence. For example, when you had the war in Korea, it was on the surface North versus South, but really it was America
versus the North.
Exactly my point. When you looked at China, and you had
Hong
that
Kong.
war
with Hong Kong.
Well, no, Hong Kong's slightly different. When you had the Chinese conflict, America chose a side. And they chose the side of Chiang Kai-shek. You understand? And so literally when Chiang Kai-shek was fighting the opposition, it was America who sought to support Chiang Kai-shek. They wanted Chiang Kai-shek in power. It's not just there. You can look at Cambodia. You can look at Vietnam. You can look in recently modern times with the Contras and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua.
In South America,
That's right. No matter where you go, there is a particular plan of action that has always been the modus operandi of America, how America behaves.
Hang on, when you say modus operandi, what do you mean?
It just simply means a mode of operation, how you behave.
So America chooses these sides. So basically, what you're trying to tell me is that, for instance, if you and I had a disagreement, right, but it's between you and I, and then someone else gets involved,
Yeah.
and for instance, that person is a person that you don't like,
Yeah.
right? And they start supplying me weapons, and then I'm attacking you with those weapons. However, the weapons come from the person that I don't like.
That very clever. That's exactly what's happening now, because essentially Ukraine is in a state of war. On the surface, that's what it looks like, and it is. But they're in a state of war, but they're being used to fight a proxy war on behalf of the Americans and the West,
Right.
who are instinctively and intrinsically against Vladimir Putin for their own reasons. I mean, I have a theory on this. And
What's the theory? You better tell us. That's what we're here for.
Well, my theory is that on the surface, it seems that they are after Putin, and they do want to destroy him. But the ultimate target really is China, and I'll come back to that later. Seemingly try and prove my point. But you made a point about people arming others to fight. And as I said, you're quite right. If you look, for example, at the position that Britain has taken in terms of sending over great tranches of taxpayers' money to fund a war against Russia. If you look what America is doing, America sent now 180 billion so far in terms of arms, intelligence, training, and so on and so forth, and it will turn out to be far more than that. If you look at how Germany and France have been coerced into taking action, if you look at what is occurring in terms of just recently, they're saying that they're going to be sending MiG-16s over to Ukraine. That's going to be quite funny, because I want to know who you're actually going to get to fly them. But that's another story.
Were you saying that the Ukrainians don't have pilots?
The Ukrainians, despite what you hear in the Western press, are bleeding casualties at the moment. There are many different piece of information that I can give you regarding the amount of deaths which is occurring. There are some people who are saying that for every single death of a Russian, 7 Ukrainians are dying. They are bleeding casualties at the moment. Russia is bigger, it's stronger. However, one of the reasons.
But we're being told that Ukraine are beating Russia.
Yeah, of course, and you must understand that the word propaganda is in the lexicon for a reason. They use it for a reason, and so propaganda, in terms of the lies, the deceit, the misdirection, and so on and so forth, is always being used. When this so-called conflict started, they said that there was an invasion of Ukraine. Well, we know that's not true. There was not an invasion of Ukraine, and if there was an invasion, then certainly you cannot invade, because of the landmass of Ukraine. You wouldn't invade Ukraine with 90,000 men, which is what the Russians used initially.
So it was more like an incursion.
It was an incursion. And the question is why did you have that incursion? And you see, this is where it starts to go awry, and whereby the media is backed by, and I don't like the term, but I do use it, by a military-industrial complex that is both evil, demonic, and literally, if I want to go eschatological, say it's satanic.
Wow.
And I'll tell you the reason why. Because certainly, if you or I are in an argument, and it comes to a confrontation with people. If you killed a couple of people, you'd have it on your conscience. These are people who have no problems in sending missiles to kill 100,000 people, 20,000 people, 10,000 people at a time. And that's the reason why I say that they are not normal the way in which most human beings are normal. When you ask the question, why would they do it? It's a question that, when answered, that most people find it difficult to accept the answer. And one of the reasons why is because they themselves are not like that. And so you cannot conceive.
You can't conceive that someone can be so evil.
Yeah, being so evil and so wicked. And so I go back to my point. Why did Putin launch an incursion? Because I will tell you now, and now I'm going to get attacked by people who will say that I'm a Russian sympathizer. I think certainly from a political point of view, a military point of view, security point of view, I think Russia did exactly the right thing.
You think Russia attacking, quote unquote, attacking Ukraine was the correct thing to do?